The project of modernity could be described in so many different ways, but within the different eras of the last 100 years that somehow also frame this question, one could say that following the Second World War, there is a real shift in the international politics and international constructs for understanding how do we live together as a planet, right? So the concept of globalization, that is the one that is framing any one of our conversations in relationship to technology or culture, was already at that time very much established through the World Bank, through the trade agreements, a bit later on through the Declaration of Human Rights and the United Nations. And of course, always financial agreements came before than the ideal ones, or the ideological ones in that sense. If we look closely into what architecture has done into that process, architecture carries ideologies within itself. And in this process of building and having these expansive economies, architectures were attached to them, right? This flattening of what constitutes collective life, the understanding of traditions, the understanding of the site, is something that within the idea of consumer culture, one receives this site, one receives the context either by media or by objects or by goods. Mm-hmm. So that detachment from the context in which one usually was inserted and one had to relate for questions of trade or for questions of survival or just simply food, became eroded as global trade started to become the real movement that has shaped the last 100 years, and from 1914, the opening of the Panama Canal, right, mm-hmm. if one wants. But so the Declaration of Human Rights, that is something that we all might refer as something good, in and of itself carries so many ideological implications that the idea of good, right, the construction of the idea of good is already in and of itself so problematic, is already so flattening. Mm-hmm. So modernity in architectural terms is just the consequence of many of those other forces. What I think is important about exhibitions like this one is where one still can find very interesting local forces that move people, families, economies, real and fictional, right? Mm-hmm. Ghosts that are present and that are historical, and that one can build and construct with them and through them. Memory is the only thing that allows us to move forward, right, in that regard, and yet at the same time, it's also about a compilation of sensations that allows us to understand that history. So while this Biennale really tries to understand architecture as a critical historical project to really understand how we move forward, what I think, and I have seen already so far, is also a very good understanding of the power of architecture and design to really enable some of those thoughts and reflections. Mm-hmm. And not to say that architecture or design is just a commentary in what is happening, but to say that actually is the carrier of history, that's the carrier of politics, that's the carrier of ideologies. And when we don't have them, then we have bullets without ideology. That is one of the issues that we also have, right? But the idea was to try to understand what does it take for someone in a particular country to reach out, to go elsewhere, to understand what it means to abandon your familiar context, your rules, your codes, your expertise, your fabrication techniques, and go elsewhere. When you have a larger scale where manufacturing systems or certain construction techniques or expertise comes with you, or when you are small enough in which you actually have to start partnering with some other local expertise that knows and understands and so on. So the criteria was that what we call a transversal object of inquiry, that is projects made by US architects practicing abroad as a way to understand how one practices in a global scale. So the US has been the country that has been more than anyone and in more countries than any other country. So for us it was a very good petri dish to understand how we practice globally. So it was not so much that it's about the US. I mean, our office is not Office US, it's Office Us, right? So, and And the project was simply that. We were really trying not to portray projects that were singular elements, but projects that conveyed a notion of collectivity, meaning that understood a certain notion of public or civic society. And that is something that has excluded some houses, and yet some houses, of course, also carry notions of public and civic values. But the idea was very much case by case, and really trying to have a broad view of many of those architectures that sometimes we would not recognize as architectures, and to really start a conversation where history is not only made of those pieces that we would like it to be made just by, but all those pieces that are also making history. And to bring everyone into the table, to make everyone conscious that we are all making history the moment we are building something, and that everyone should be conscious of that.